Hello, it's Aaron. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have a very special guest who goes by the name Hickman or Shagbark Hick, which is his X account. I'll be sure to put a link to that in the show notes. He's one of the most interesting accounts on X, and you read him, and you're not really sure if it's real or if this is performance art or what's going on, but we actually know someone in common. So he actually is real. So that's great. I'll just go through a little bit of what he is. I'm going to start over again. I did a terrible job there.
That's just fine.
Okay. How's that? This is the beauty of recording. Hello, it's Aaron. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm joined today by a very special guest who's one of the most interesting accounts on Twitter/X. He goes by the name Hickman, or his account is Shagbark Hick. I happen to have a bunch of Shagbark hickories in my backyard, by the way.
Great.
And as I
Great.
said, one of the most interesting accounts there is promoting a very unique lifestyle. And you never know if these guys are real or if they're just performance artists or what's going on, but we actually know someone in common. And he assures me that Mr. Hick actually is a real guy, really living this way. So, Hickman, thank you for joining.
No problem. Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
You posted that you just had your first child. So, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, she's a beautiful, beautiful little creature. Uh, changes everything, really. You can. I don't think there's everybody who told me there's nothing you can do to prepare for it was right. There's nothing you can do to prepare.
No, I
It's amazing.
agree. It is
Yeah.
amazing. Well, congratulations. And this is a great example of the turnaround in your life. You said that basically you went from being the homeless guy to
Mm.
driving by one of your properties just to see what's going on there in the span of about 8 years. Were you actually homeless?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, now look, I'll tell you this is I chose that life. I wanted to hitchhike around the country. I wanted to see things. I wanted to do things cheaply. So I figured the easiest way to travel is to not rent hotels or to ever rent an apartment or to stay anywhere. So I lived like a homeless person. But I'll tell you, after so many years of doing it, everybody you know gets used to it. You get used to it. And if you run into a tight spot 3,000 miles from home, you're out there with everybody else, you know. So I got used to that way of living and kind of got what I guess I could call some third world ingenuity trained into me, where I lived in shantytown in the desert. I stayed in homeless camps. I've been around all kinds of stuff, all kinds of people, ranging from junkies to bums, freight train hoppers, crust punks, anarchists, and then and as a hitchhiker, I was exposed to all kinds of people on the other side of the spectrum too, people who would pick me up. So I got a pretty good sense of the country. But yeah, I slept rough at least 1,000 nights. So
Wow. How did you choose that lifestyle? I guess it sounds like very bohemian, but is that like an accurate read, or how did you get into this?
maybe, maybe I don't know. That's that term is so charged in so many ways. I'm not from the ilk of people that bona fide bohemians typically are. I just was like a loner, only child kid who grew up in a depressed, middle of nowhere place with no prospects. And I read a lot and I liked maps. So I decided to travel, because the options that were presented to me when I was a kid were join the military, go to college, or get a job. And at the time, the jobs were like work at the Walmart distribution warehouse, or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I know people who do that and they all look miserable. So I'm not doing that. I didn't want to kill anybody. So I wouldn't join the army. And I hadn't thought to join the Coast Guard yet, even though I later would. Um, so it just was like, yeah, I better go somewhere, see the country. Why not? You know?
You say you were in the Coast Guard for a while?
Yeah, so after probably about 5, 6, 7 years of travel and just kind of being a bum, like not traveling but being homeless, uh, and finally, I built a cabin on my uncle's property. I stayed in the cabin, and after that winter, I said, "Okay, I'm gonna do something different now." And I joined the United States Coast Guard in 2019, and I served for 4 years, and just got out in 2020 three, I guess. Yeah, 2023. Feels like
No.
yesterday.
Well, you are an evangelist of sorts for a way of life that is very different from the traditional credentialist, meritocracy, striver lifestyle. I mean, I don't think you say everyone should do this, but you seem to be
No,
a critic of this idea that there's only one path to success in life, which is to go to college and then get one of those corporate jobs and all the people complaining they can't afford houses. You're like, there are other ways to live. And so, kind of, what is this philosophy you've kind of developed as you've lived this way?
it starts with suicide. When I was a traveler, I ran into many people. I made many friends who are now deceased. People who were addicted to drugs, people who killed themselves, and some of this would be to be expected when you're on the margins of society. But what shocked was I would sit under an overpass in California or Utah or wherever I was, and I would have these conversations with these desperate people. And then I would get above the overpass and stick my thumb out and go hitchhiking, and people would pick me up in nice cars who have lots of money, and they would confess to me, all of the horrible things that they were feeling. And I talked several people down from suicide, who were in a more upper middle class demographic, who had made it. They were living the dream. They got the credentials. They did the stuff, and they couldn't hack it, and it drove them nuts. So I looked at that and I said, well, wait a minute. These people don't have to do what they're doing. There are other ways. And when I listened to their problems of, oh, I work too much. Oh, I'm never with my children. I'm never with my wife. I can't afford a house, or I can't find a wife, or it's just failure to launch, you're stuck. Then it's like, oh, well, I've been to all these other places. They're nice places. Look in small town North Dakota, small town Iowa, small town Maine, little Rust Belt cities in Pennsylvania or upstate New York. And it's like, you could make a go of it there. You would just have to veer off the path a little bit. But if you're literally at the point where you're thinking, oh, I ought to jump into a noose because I'm so over this, then don't do that. Don't even think about that. Do something way different. And I want to give the notes of how I've lived my life to those people so that they feel that they have another option and they don't wind up killing themselves. Because in a lot of cases, they really do. So I'd like to stop that. And I think there's no reason for it.
Where are you living today?
I live in the northern Adirondacks, in a little village of about 250 people, um, maybe 30, 40 miles from Canada.
Yes, you're by the border. It's pretty remote. Is it pretty depressed up there?
Very much so. Yeah, yeah. There's not much in the way of a future for this town that I live in, and I'm not sure what my role is there. Maybe it's just been an interesting experience, and I'll eventually move on. Maybe not. But the median age is just over 60, and the churches are closing down. There's no jobs. The school that is the number one employer in the area is the school, and it's lost 50% of its enrollment in the last 20 years. So prospects are bleak, but the land is beautiful. I love the land, and my house was only $33,000, move-in ready. I didn't even have to do any work on it. We just moved right in. So
So, 30, how many acres do you have?
a tenth of an acre. That's the
Okay.
rub. That's a little of why I'm looking for another place now, because between my firewood and my four wheeler, and if I have a guest parked in the driveway, it's like I don't have any room for anything.
Okay.
So
Okay. But you've bought some other land, right? Is that true? Or are you just looking at it?
right now, I'm looking for land, um, really in a discernment period of seeing where exactly we'd like to buy on a permanent basis. It might be up north, it might be in the Adirondacks, it might be in the Mohawk Valley, but it'll be in upstate New York for sure.
Yeah. So I mentioned that this is a depressed town because I think some people hear the term Adirondacks and think of like where very posh people have summer homes, but that's not all. So it's a depressed town. So how do you actually make a living in this depressed town?
I write for a living. Um, I do magazine articles. I run my own publication called Hickman's Hinterlands, where I write about the future of rural America. And it's a little frustrating because I can make a living writing about the future of rural America, but that the idea of writing about the future of rural America cannot, in and of itself, be the future of rural America. There has to
Right.
be something else. So, I don't have an answer to that yet, but I want to find one, and I have a lot of contacts in this state who are working on really good answers. Some really great groups. So,
So in essence, you don't really have a job. You make money writing, kind of an influencer in a sense, if you want to call it that.
well, I want to be careful with that because to me, the value that I provide, those who pay me, is in the writing and in the photography and in some of the thinking. What I don't like is I don't like when I have people who have a parasocial relationship with me, like an influencer, and they're real invested in my life, and they're watching me, and they have all these ideas, and it's like, buddy, like you should just read my stuff and like go live your own life. It's okay, you know. So I'm trying to be more writer than influencer, even if
Okay.
the internet might wish that I would go the other way. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm a writer, basically. I mean, I have a podcast, obviously, but I'm not. I'm not making a living through a traditional like influencer on Instagram. My X monetization payouts are not paying the rent. I'll tell you that much. So I'm assuming your cost of living is extremely low,
Yeah. Yep.
and
I live on probably $600 a month.
$600 a month, and you're married, and you have a kid. How does it work that you can live on that little money? Because I think this is what people don't. I think people can believe that there's cheap property in places nobody wants to live. I don't think people can
Yeah.
believe you can live on such so little money. How is that possible?
Well, I saved up. I bought our house. I have no mortgage on the house, so I pay property taxes, maybe $100 a month. Where you use very little electricity. Um, we heat with wood. We eat food that we buy from the Amish. We do not have an automobile. We use the public rural county transit bus to get place to place. So when you add all that up, it's like, what is there to spend money on? It's not that much. We don't have expensive hobbies either. You know, like I have a canoe. You know, we have a library. We have bicycles. You know, so but of course, $600 in a month. If I earn more than that, then I get to save it. And so having the savings makes it even easier to keep the cost of living low because then I can use my savings to spend on things that will save us even more money. You know,
Hmm.
like I just bought a four wheeler to haul wood with and to plow with and stuff like that. I was only able to buy the four wheeler because I could save up enough money for it on my pretty small salary because we already are living so cheap. So it's like a self-reinforcing loop, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, if you're on the treadmill of spending a lot of money, and I don't want to go into, I don't want to turn this into like a finance podcast, but you're on the treadmill of the big mortgage and the car payments and all of that stuff, and you're like, how do I live on this? How do you how would you suggest people start weaning themselves off of that? Or do you have any suggestions? Because it seems like you were never on that treadmill yourself. But is there how do you
Not
get off
really.
of it?
What I would say is study anthropology and study history. Get some perspective, right? I don't know. Okay, if you are a young Earth creationist, things are a little different. Humans have been human for 5, 6,000 years. Even so, we've only been doing this for a short amount of time. Now, if you're not a young Earth creationist and you accept the kind of secular scientific view of the history of the human race, we've been anatomically modern humans for 200,000 years. Agriculture only got popular in the last 6,000. The Industrial Revolution was only, what, 250 years ago. The internet is very, 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 air conditioning, very recent. Automobiles, very recent. Electricity, very recent. So if you're going to tell me that human beings survive for 99.99% of our history without all this stuff, but you can't, why is that? And so if you can say, well, wait a minute, let me try living in a way my own great 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 grandfather would have understood and would have found legible, then you're gonna all of a sudden have the motivation to say, yeah, wait a minute, maybe I can live a little simpler. And if you do live a little simpler, your cost of living will plummet dramatically, very quickly. Um, but you will also be completely socially unacceptable in our high consumption, GDP obsessed economy. You know,
Yeah, so you basically don't accept the complaints from a lot of people that like housing is too expensive. I can't afford to live anywhere. You say, look,
right?
there's if you really want to own a house, you can own one, right? You can make the decision to do this other thing. People that seems to enrage people for some reason. Why is that?
Yeah. Um, I think that at least on Twitter, there's a lot of political actors who sow disgruntlement, mass disgruntlement, and they use it for political capital, right? Like a lot of the right wing posters will be like, oh, they, I guess the Democrats are letting in all these immigrants who are driving up the cost of housing, and so I'm mad about that. And if you're not mad about that, then you're part of the problem, right? And that gets them to turn up to vote and to donate to think tanks and to go to these events and all this stuff. So it's useful to have a large body of people who are so disgruntled that they're actually paralyzed and waiting for a political savior to ameliorate their perceived difficulties. The number one thing that people in that wheelhouse, the kind of grifting politico types, hate are self sufficient people who can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just fix their own problems for themselves with the resources that are available, which is kind of the American way for a long time. So I find it really funny when there's all these people who are like big patriots, but they get mad when I tell them, hey, you should do something like go out west to the frontier and buy a house, like how America was founded, or whatever. It's always very strange to me that people have all these problems with that idea. Um, but I think it's psychological, basically. You know,
So your lifestyle is unique to say the least, and yet you were able to get married and have a kid. And you hear all of this thing about like, oh, you have to make so much money or no woman will want to marry you. Uh, what made your wife decide she wanted to sign up for this? Like, how did you find a wife?
well, the good thing about Twitter is that it's a filter for people with niche interests who are obscure and are mostly illegible. And somehow we find each other on the internet, and it's really beautiful. And I've made plenty of friends this way too. But eventually, one of those friends who I made was a nice young lady up in Canada. She's married with kids. She's an Orthodox Christian. She said, "Oh, I see how difficult it is for weirdos like yourselves to like find each other, and I like you all, and I think you should get married." And so she introduced me to Katura, my wife, and we were off to the races from there. So she was already into this stuff. She
Oh,
grew up with
great.
no social security number, grew up with the Amish partially, super, super frugal, super poor, but making the most of it and making it nice. So she was already into this stuff and then met me and is like, oh, perfect. The number one thing she didn't ever want is a man who has like a regular 9 to 5 corporate job. She just never wanted that. So and I contend people will say, "Oh, well, you just got lucky. Well, you're just an outlier or whatever." And it's like, no, like if you post enough and you're articulate and you're looking for what you're looking for and you know what you want, you'll find it. It only takes one person for each person. That's all it takes. We're like, I'm not a polygamist, so I can't speak to that. But you know, um, that's uh, that's it.
Well, there is a lot of despair being sold on the internet, and then the idea that you could have an optimistic perspective on the opportunities of America and how you can own a house and get married and have kids without signing up to indenture yourself to the man at some corporation. That's not something that, again, a lot of people don't like that today. It seems to be like unpopular because everybody here is kind of not even just the influencers or the politicos or some of that, but like we're really wrapped up in the idea that things must be terrible in America. And there's certainly a lot of bad things. I'd be the first to tell you that.
Right.
But you're basically saying, actually, you can still build a life here. You can still build a great life here if you're willing to seize the brass ring.
Definitely. Right.
You you say you don't own any land, but you talk a lot in your Twitter about land and acquiring land and cheap land. Uh, is there some significance to you in the idea of owning land? Is that like a part of the?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm affiliated with the Catholic land movement, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church talks a lot about how um, I can't quote it verbatim. I wish I could, but in owning land and having property, um, we can understand something of God our Father who created us and created the land, and in stewarding it, we can see what something of what He sees in us in all of the world. And so like I think it's really important to have a piece of your own because it changes you. I only own 1.1 acres in total, but when I first took possession of that first acre, I walked around it like just stunned. I felt different. I'm like, wait a minute, this is mine. Like, you can't kick me out of here. And whatever effort I put onto this property, I get to keep and keep reaping benefits from it for as long as I like until I sell it or die. And there's something about the permanence of that arrangement that is the ultimate tonic to the modern age where everything just seems like people make it up as they go along. Everything is made of plastic, everything is cheap, everything just vanishes in your hand the minute you've purchased it. And you're like, what is the purpose of all this? Land doesn't do that. Land is primal, ancient, something else. So I think it's good. I think everybody should try to own at least a couple acres of land.
How much land are you ambitious to own? Do you have like a figure of a dream of what you'd like to?
Well, I can tell you, like, people say, if I win the lottery, I won't tell you, but there'll be signs. I mean, yeah, I'll become a land baron. I would park most of my money in land if I ever had any real money. Um, but for my actual own purposes, I don't think you need much more than 3 acres. Um, because when you think about an acre, I mean, it's the size of a football field without the end zone, right? That's a big area. You could grow a lot of food on that. You could walk around on that for years, and you would always find something new. I think 3 acres is really ideal. Um, you get into managing. Like I just looked at a 133-acre parcel up on the Canadian border, and it was unmanageable. It was a giant thicket. You would need heavy equipment and unlimited free time to like make it into anything productive. And it's like
Mm.
I don't need to get involved with this. That's a whole separate business from the things I'm already engaged in. So I don't think you need that much land, but some, just enough.
One time you argued that the threshold of entry into some of the things you're talking about is $10,000. You have to acquire your first $10,000. What's the significance of $10,000, and how did you get up with that figure?
In a national search on Zillow for parcels of acreage of any size on which you could get away with building a habitable structure. I'm not going to say build a legal structure. Um, that's your launch pad. If you can obtain that, then you're living rent free, which already puts you, just that alone would put you in a different ball game compared to almost all other Americans, especially at that income level. Or alternatively, if you've taken a year to build up your credit score well enough and you have the income history to be able to get a mortgage, $10,000 is more than a down payment on a house of perhaps $45,000, and then you take on a very small mortgage. Which again, the size of that mortgage, I have such a mortgage on one of my houses, and it's $404 a month, which is just obscenely low. It's like there are storage units that rent for more than that. So I'm playing a different game when it comes to
Hmm.
that. But it takes 10 grand. You have to get the cash to be able to get there.
Hmm. And how do you get a mortgage that small from a bank?
Well, I had no trouble with it personally. So
Hmm.
I'm not going to say which bank, but there's a national bank that I worked with. Um, they told me the smallest mortgage they would write me was 25,000. They had no minimum property requirements. They did not require an appraisal or an inspection because it was too small for them to fool with that. And it was fine. It was no big deal. And when I asked my mortgage officer later, I said, would anybody be able to do what I did? And she said, yeah, we do it occasionally. It's kind of rare, but it does happen. And it is totally a valid way to do business, and we'll always do it. And there are other banks that do it too. So I don't know where this idea that you can't get a mortgage for 50 grand or less came up, but it has not been true in my experience.
Hmm. So obviously, the $400 mortgage is not part of the $600 that you're living on a month.
What is? Just a second.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having problems here, but I heard you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What's the financial model for the $400 mortgage versus like the $600 you say that you're able to live on a month? Because your main property has no mortgage. Is this like a separate thing? You're treating this as like an investment or something?
Yeah, that house, my brother-in-law took an interest in it, so he's actually up there as we speak, fixing it up. He's gonna live in it with his wife, and yeah, he may eventually sell it at a profit for the effort that he's put into it. But we have a deal going right now. He just took the property over. I didn't charge him anything. I said, if and when you sell, you flip the mortgage. As long as you pay the mortgage, I don't mind what you do with it. I just wanted to give him something he could do. But no, when I was living there, I was not living on $600 a month. You
Yeah.
can only do that mortgage free. There's no way around that.
Right. But that's
When I
not a
was
huge
living there, I
mortgage.
was no, it's not. I mean, I could still live when I lived there. I could live on probably about 1,000, maybe 1,100, depending. But it wasn't bad.
And I guess the other question people would have is what you do for health care. Is this something where you qualify for Medicaid or something because your income's so low, or how do you deal with health care? Because that's one of the things that people seem to get gouged on all the time.
I would not qualify for Medicaid this year for the first year of my life, probably. Um, but what we do is we do whatever the Amish do. So we have a lot of Amish neighbors. Like we just had a baby with an Amish midwife. Um, and it was $100 she wanted. It was $100. I gave her 200, because I wanted to be nice. But she was a nice lady. She was visiting from Mexico, and she helped us out just fine. They also have dentists. They also have certain doctors, but for things that they can't get and they can't do, they go to Mexico. So we're talking about, like, my wife has a tooth problem right now, and we're talking about next month. Um, Spending $800 on train tickets round trip to Tijuana and going to Tijuana with the Amish, who have their own connections and so forth for all kinds of doctors. My neighbor has cancer. My Amish neighbor, she's getting chemo in Mexico. but they also do teeth and surgeries and you name it, and it's all for cash. And it's not, a chemo treatment that would be billed to insurance, 25 or $30,000 at a go. Down there, she can get it for I think $1,300. So, and it's cash, but yeah.
Yeah, and so presumably they also kind of socialize this a little bit too, with amongst themselves when they have
I
needs.
don't know
Let's
that they do. I think for major things they do, such as one of our neighbors, her son got kicked in the head by a horse and had to go, out of state for some crazy surgery. And I do believe the community picks that up. Um, but generally, no. For the smaller stuff, they tend to pay cash. Anything that's under 10 grand, um, it'll be on them to do usually. So.
Now, not everybody wants to live the life that you live, but are there, and I don't think you want everybody to live this life. You just want people to see it's a possibility. But what is the mindset shift that you think Americans ought to make?
Gain perspective on how human beings have lived from the dawn of time to now and recognize that the suite of luxuries that we now consider to be normal is not normal. It is not necessary for human flourishing. And some of it is nice. Like I've bought amoxicillin from Mexico that came in handy when I got an ear infection. That's nice. I'm not going to knock that. I'm glad I had that, right? But for the most part, I think if we just move our mindset back to 1850 and just say, okay, by default, I do whatever they did in 1850, unless there's a really good argument for doing something different. And then I will attempt to do it in the cheapest way possible. If you do that, then your expenses are lower and you keep more of what you earn. Or if you don't want to earn, you're free to say, hey, my boss won't let me take 3 weeks off to go to Greece with my wife next summer. I'll just quit. I don't have to do it because I've already saved up all this money and it doesn't matter. So it's accessing higher levels of agency and autonomy and freedom in your life by being frugal. And by situating your frugality historically, you can see that it's not like some horrible, ghastly way of living. It's actually just a normal way of life for almost all of human history until yesterday. So that's kind of my philosophy in a nutshell, I guess.
So, is the idea of freedom and having more agency over your own life like one of the main drivers for why you live this way?
Partially. Um, but really, I don't actually accept the idea that freedom as an abstract end unto itself is like the ultimate human good. What I do accept is that submission to God and His church and a heavy emphasis placed on the family and on the land and on living a natural human life. These things are all very good. And in the current circumstances, it takes a lot of freedom to focus on those things. I grew up with no father, right? And I've met young men who had fathers, but they were really no different from me because their dad worked 80 hours a week, so they never saw him. This is unnatural. This isn't good. And he was working for what? To pay off his expensive automobiles and his big mortgage and all the other normal stuff people do. You can't blame his father for doing this because it's normal. But his father would have been better off to say, you know what? We're going to forego the big fancy mortgage and the big cars and all that stuff, and I'm going to spend time with my son. You see, so I wanna put all my time into serving the church and into being with my wife and my baby and into normal biological processes like sleep without alarm clocks. I think you live longer if you're not constantly under stress and constantly sleep deprived, stuff like that. So
I don't recall ever seeing you use the word homesteader. I don't know if I just missed it. Because a lot of people talk about homesteading, but at least it's not central to the way you talk about things. How do you think about the idea of homesteading versus what you do?
That's an interesting question, and you're right. I've never really talked about homesteading. I don't consider myself a homesteader. This is nothing that I really do. But I guess the homesteader is more interested in self-sufficiency, um, or something like it, and I just don't care about that. Because honestly, here's the thing. My wife and I have done this math before too. It's like, should we get chickens? Okay, well, a chicken coop's going to cost X amount of dollars. The hens and the roosters are going to cost this, or if we buy chicks, it'll cost even more. Then you got the feed, you got the fencing, and then you got the foxes who eat your chickens, and it's like, but we could just buy eggs from the Amish for $1.50 a dozen. Why would I bother with that? It's stupid. It's a waste of my time. I don't have any abstract ideal that would glorify the one who raises his own chicken eggs. I'll do it if it's the cheap thing, but if it's not the cheap thing, I wouldn't do it unless I really had like a hobby like desire for it. Whereas I think the homesteader would say it's an innate moral good to raise your own
Mm,
eggs at your house. And I don't deny them that. I mean, they might be right, but I don't think like that, you know.
yeah. Well, that's interesting. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. It's great, although I know you do have more time than a lot of people because the way you live your life. Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you'd like to share with people before we wrap up?
Oh, I don't know. The only thing I would add, so as to provide your viewer a complete view of kind of what I do, is I would also just add that so much of this revolves around rural America and the dying parts of rural America because that's where life is cheap, you know. So I just think that picking apart this fetish we have for the metropolitan, the top 10 biggest cities in the country. Everybody wants to pack into them, and that's all right. And they're free to do that if they wish. But deconstructing that idea and just saying, you know what, maybe it's all right if I move to Enid, Oklahoma, you know, or if I move to Madawaska, Maine, or St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. These are no name towns, but they're great towns, you know. So I think that's another major component because it's a rural thing. There's no urban equivalent to what I do. You're not going to do what I'm doing in Manhattan or in Boston or in San Francisco. You're just not going to do it unless you're actually literally homeless. You know,
Mm.
so I think it's important to add that disclaimer.
Well, with that, we'll conclude. My guest today has been Hickman, aka Shagbark Hick. He's a great account on X. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. Be sure to give him a follow. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.